Okay, so let's get to the thing. We're going to start with the first question by Ivan Dinev, and it will be directed to my favorite person today. Have you tried to use geoprofiling methods on crimes that involve a lot of traveling, displacement? For example, phone bank scams that are common in Bulgaria.
Okay, that's a brilliant question, whoever answered it.
Ivan Dinev.
And in well done, Ivan, yeah. In criminology, this is known as commuter crime. And there are certain types of crime which, by their very nature, have to happen in certain places. And in fact, the Zimbabwe poaching example is one of those. But it might be something like the London riots when people were looting different shops. And if you're going to go and loot shops, you need some shops to be there. I'm not a scientist for nothing. Stop me if I'm going too fast, Lubo, right? It does complicate it. And the easiest analogy, I'm going to use a Scottish analogy because I'm from Scotland. If all of the crime in London was due to people from Dundee coming down on the train, what you will find is all the crimes will disperse around King's Cross Station. So you will find where they're coming in, not where they came from. You can do some maths to kind of weight that, but you do need to have some idea about what's going on, about the relative probability of where people come from. In terms of things like phone scams, we talked to the UK Home Office about some computer crime. And my naive assumption was we would have to run all of this analysis in network space to get the interconnectedness of the computers. And that's partly true, but it turns out that computer criminals are also dumb, and they go and buy all their computer components from their local shop. So when you bust the facilities they're using, you actually just look at where all the computers came from, and you find where the criminals are. It's more complicated to run it in network space, but we can do it. It's not in the publicly available package yet.
Okay, cool. Let me just again highlight. Ще говоря на fucking английски. Пишете въпроси на slide.do. Все още гледам въпроси, добавям прочее, така че не е късно, ако сте забравили, сте се разсеяли, пили сте бира и така нататък, все още имате шанс да задавате въпросчета. Така. So, next question. Is genome replacement a hope for solving the problem with rising antibiotic resistance? Let's go, Jonathan.
Yeah. So that's a really topical one. So the trick there is that it's actually the bugs that are using the genome replacement against us. So they're using natural mechanisms to acquire new abilities. So a lot of these antibiotic resistance genes are fairly freely transmitted between bacterial populations. You often find that when you're looking for these resistance genes in the bacteria, they're on sort of mobile units, sometimes even completely separate from the bacterial chromosome. The problem with how we would address it with CRISPR, I mean, I guess we could go down the route that we did with mosquitoes, so we could engineer bacteria to remove those resistance genes, but then the bacteria would actually not be able to compete in the outside world as effectively as the resistant bacteria, so it's a problem. I guess thinking really long term, we might be able to engineer ourselves to be resistant to the bacteria, but it's kind of a long way off, and again, ethical issues.
Yeah. Understatement of the year.
You could use it in development to speed up the development of new substances.
Right. So operationally,
very classical way.
Yeah, operationally
classical
we could do that. Yeah. Part of the problem is that with antibiotics there's no money in it, right? So which sounds insane, right? Because we're facing an apocalypse, potentially. But there really isn't money in for pharmaceuticals. The classic thing about antibiotics is once you've developed it, and once it's been disseminated to treat all the people, that's it, you're done.
Well, there is another thing. I mean, the regulators would, on the one hand, tell you you can only use a new antibiotic on a couple of thousand patients to keep
Right.
the resistance down, and at the same time, other regulators would be telling you it's not much better than a regular antibiotic. It can be like 10% more expensive. It can even be twice as expensive. But if you only have like a thousandth of the patient population, it's still not going to be a lot of money. So they would have to be really, really expensive to be worth it for the industry to go
So
into
basically we need more sick people.
that. We need the willingness to pay for it, very simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Health insurers would have to be made to pay for it. Then there would be research.
Okay, just one note. Последния въпрос просто е от някой, който не си е написал името. Пак казвам, първите 10 въпроса, визии, неща, който иска тук при мен. Те лека полека ме обграждат между с тях, което е малко странно. Нещо си. Окей. Това изобщо не е awkward. Okay, so next question is for Maggie.
Hi.
That's adorable. Is there anything astronomers from local observatories with less advanced telescopes can do to help gather data and contribute to such researches? I'm guessing to research of dark matter, dark energy, etc.
Yeah, so I did show a slide about the synergies with Earth-based telescopes. And like I said, when we send this thing to space, we need to calibrate it with on-Earth telescopes to make sure we are looking at the right objects and we are measuring them correctly, and not that we've sent this like £500 million telescope into space and there's some damage to it causing all of our shape measurements to be wrong. So definitely on Earth we can do a lot of follow-up and calibration for that.
I'd like to just interject with an amazing question, which we get basically every event at this point. I don't know why. It's really kind of weird. It's, will CRISPR cure baldness?
I wonder where that came from.
I don't know, man.
It was me, yeah.
Hope so.
Again, if we skip past all the ethical issues, baldness is one of the there's more than one gene involved, and it's not as simple. It's not completely simple, but it is relatively simple for the things that you would want to change, say compared to height or IQ. So, yeah, potentially, if we were allowed to do that.
So what
Yes.
ethical issues are associated with this shit? I mean, come on. I mean,
Well, so we would have to be engineering embryos.
Ah,
Okay,
shit.
so it's not going to cure baldness now. Okay, there is potentially.
I'm listening.
Okay, so there's a more expensive way of doing CRISPR, which might work, where we put the system into viruses and infect you with the virus. And provided we could target that, I mean, obviously, baldness, potentially, we might just have to spread it on your head.
Yeah.
But the skin is quite resistant to things like that. So
Okay.
if there was a way of delivering it to your skin cells, we might be able to do that. There, what we would be doing is probably putting genes in. So we'd be adding genes in. Adding genes is always easier than taking them away, generally speaking.
Well, you're not making it sound very sexy, to be completely fair. I mean, you're just not selling it to me.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to Maggie again. What will happen to the Euclid telescope at the end of its mission? Will it be brought down to Earth or left in space?
So at the moment, Euclid is planned for 6 years. It has enough fuel to go on for 7. But of course, we know from current space telescopes, for example, XMM Newton, that was launched in '99. And it was only meant to be up there for a few years. But it's still running now, and they found a way to keep the telescope running on low fuel because they had this funny mechanism on their orientations of the XMM gyroscope.
Do they call it a funny mechanism?
No, it has a very scientific name. But we're always improving. We're always thinking of new ways to better use the equipment that we send up. Like right now, we can't think of a better way to make more efficient use of the fuel, but maybe in 7 years' time, we might have found a way, we've only got like 5% fuel left, but we can go on for another 10 years. That would be great, of course.
Cool.
But actually, the CCD itself is going to be damaged by these high energy cosmic rays. And that's going to degrade the quality of the images over time. So we will still be able to use it for science, but not for the science that we want to do.
Oh, so for like B-class science, for example, just spying on Mars and shit.
No, like,
I don't know. She basically just shut me down, you know. Okay, so the next one is for Steve. Is geoprofiling efficient for time-sensitive matters, for example, an infectious outbreak? How long does it take to collect the data and create a geoprofile?
Okay, it's another good question. When I first developed our model, I used to stress that we could handle very, very big data sets, and then this was inevitably the question. And of course, you need to remember that this technique arose in crime science, and we were talking about this over dinner last night. If you have, you know, a detective comes to me and says, right, there's been some serial murders in Sofia. There's 10 of them. Can you run a profile? If I then say, it's not really worth it with 10, can you give me a call when you've got a couple of hundred? That's not a useful method, right? In crime science, it's generally considered that you can run it on as few as 5 data points. And that isn't even necessarily 5 murders, that's 5 locations. So it might be a victim encounter site, a body dump site, a weapon dump site, or so on. My view, if you run it on just 5 to 10 data points, the profile doesn't really give you anything you don't get by eye. But anything from 5 up, it's at least worth having a look, because the answer to the second part of the question is a fraction of a second. Anything up to a few thousand data points runs so quick it doesn't matter. After that, you might need to run it in parallel on the cluster or run it for an hour or 2. But yeah, it's pretty useful.
Nice.
But you still have to generate the data.
You still need the data.
You just should geolocate
I mean, that's
them,
in a quick disease outbreak and a short disease outbreak, that might be...
Yeah, I mean, and of course, the payoff is that early in the outbreak is exactly when you need the intervention, because that's when you've got a chance of controlling it. So the malaria problem was all of the analysis was done well after the outbreak started. The other good thing, of course, is that if you're talking about biological or disease stuff, no one is trying to mislead you. It's very common for criminals to hide things or try and dump bodies in, you know, easy-to-find locations miles away from them. And you don't have any of those problems with mosquitoes, who are generally much better behaved than serial murderers. Not always, but yeah, so.
Jesus, that's a really low bar, though. Okay, so next question is for Christo. Do you think the strong trend of individualism combined with genetic modifications that humans can undergo will lead to a deeply separated future society? The most fucked up question, basically, is for you. So.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Of course, well, 2 arguments. Are there now expensive drugs? Yes, there are. Who can use them? Those who can afford them. Yeah, so CRISPR will be affordable for limited person, right? And the second thing is, in order to support science and have discoveries, you also need money. So the guys with money will support the science, which is basically normally. And it will get to a point in time where those who can afford, they will use it and be genetically modified. So there is nothing strange here. The society is going to be separated at a certain point.
So basically, you think this is going to be a fucking dystopia?
Yeah, it will be. It will be. Well, CRISPR might be not the only factor.
Isn't this point that it's already a dystopia?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, because if you think about
Yeah.
educational attainment, educational attainment is already strongly correlated with the income of the parents.
Yeah.
In fact, it's the stronger correlation. There were recent papers that came out looking at the genetics of educational attainment, and one of the strongest things was the socioeconomic.
Yeah, I mean, if you do the heritability calculations, just about the most heritable thing about humans is money, actually.
There is no conspiracy here.
Yeah.
So we are generally speaking not only about CRISPR, but
Or is there?
Yeah, might be. There
He
might
would
be.
say that.
We
wouldn't he?
would all
Yeah.
say that. 'cause we're all
So sharply dressed. Goddamn lawyers.
Me or him?
Sorry?
Who's sharply dressed, me or him?
You know, we used to, last few days we were talking that he didn't bring his kilt
Yeah.
because he's into kilts and shit. And I found out that there's actually a thing called the tactical kilt. So for all your tactical needs while wearing a kilt, whatever they may be. I don't know. But what? Okay, so I'll just linger on for a moment. Can you tell me what the use for tactical kilts would be?
It's military kilts, basically. So they're a
Okay.
bit more lightweight, they're a bit more resistant to tearing, and they don't absorb water quite as much as the woolen kilts. It's all science, Lubo.
That's incredibly curious, yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I think Jonathan and I will definitely do this in kilts if you invite us again. Right? Tactical kilts. Yeah, tactical kilts. Yeah, there we are.
It's also known as the tactical.
How did you get that photo of me?
John has an amazing photo on the Great Wall of China where he's basically sitting like this. And
Yeah.
be like, I'll call it China. It's amazing. Okay, moving on. Okay,
Thanks.
wow.
stop.
Is there a science guy killed? Or, for
I think there's a
example,
gap.
making
Okay,
experiments
there's a
the
gap
lab.
in the market.
I think I might have to stop you here. So, okay, the following question is again related to what Steve does. Have you seen a case where the criminals know about your model or similar models and use that knowledge to sabotage the investigation?
I think what the person there is really asking is how can they get away with serial murder? And you get asked that question.
Restrain him.
Yeah, you get asked that quite a lot actually, and the answer is it's probably difficult. Humans are bad at randomness, and usually when criminals try and complicate things, they get it wrong because they're pretty dumb, actually. The classic example with serial killers, and we were chatting about this earlier, is basically the plot of The Silence of the Lambs, is that the first victim is someone that the killer has seen regularly, close to home, has fantasized about killing, and then does. And they panic a bit, actually, and the body is usually very well hidden. But then some months go by, and they think, well, no one caught me, and I quite like that. And the second victim, they will try and lure the investigation away. So in one case, Kim Rossmo, the Canadian cop I mentioned, investigated. The first body was chopped up, embedded in blocks of concrete and dumped underwater. The second victim was dumped by a public footpath miles away in another part of the city. So it's very common in these cases for the second body to be the first one that you find. But of course, the police know this, so they concentrate on what was actually the first victim. And just in passing, to back up my point that criminals are dumb, we were chatting about this earlier. My very favourite example is a guy who robbed a post office in the UK. And, I said people like to commit crimes close to home. He robbed his local post office. The post office where he collected his unemployment benefit every week. And he was just smart enough to realize that this might be a problem. So he adopted a brilliant disguise. And he wore a false beard, completely ignoring the fact that until 2 weeks previously, he had a beard. So the staff gave him the money, he went away, they phoned the police, gave them his name, his address, and his national insurance number. The police, I saw the detective inspector being interviewed, and he was almost helpless with laughter, because he said, the guy still doesn't know how I caught him. he thinks I'm Sherlock Holmes. So yeah.
Regarding this thing with the first murder and the second murder, can you weigh data points in your analysis? I mean, can you put the higher weight on the first?
Yeah, we can. The other interesting thing is that in both murder cases, particularly in burglary and also in disease outbreaks, at the moment the model is just clustering stuff spatially. But actually the temporal information you can also take into account. So disease cases that occur together closer in time are more likely to share a source. And I've got a PhD student currently working on that. So.
Okay, so I'm just going to throw a really quick question. Can we make Hulk babies?
Make
Hulk babies.
Hulk.
Hulk.
Hulk,
Hulk.
babies.
You know,
right.
like the Hulk, but a baby.
Okay, so
I'm here for you.
right, so there is already a naturally occurring mutation in lots of different mammals, including humans, but it was originally, I think, discovered in cows.
How the fuck did you find that? Seriously?
It's in a gene called myostatin, and what it does is it gives you a double-muscled phenotype. So it's a developmental control gene, and what happens is you, as the name suggests, you have twice the amount of muscle. So it's really useful, obviously, agriculturally for cows. And you do occasionally see human mutations with this. That, I guess, would be a starting point. So that already exists. You don't need to use CRISPR. There are obviously problems in having a double-muscled phenotype. It's not, that's not everybody would think that was so great. The green thing, well, we can do that, right? As long as you're standing under a UV source, we've got green fluorescent protein. I'm sure we could find another pigment that was green under visible light. That's probably straightforward. We could probably do that now, okay? Because, like I say, adding in genes is pretty straightforward. So as long as you had an enzyme which made a colored substrate from things that were already present in the cell, you could make that. The inducible bit, because that's really what you want, isn't it? You want to be Bruce Banner some of the time, and the Hulk. So that's
harder.
That's in the realms of physics now, right?
Quantum
But also,
physics.
but also biology. You could not grow that quickly, and if you did grow that quickly, boy, you're in trouble, right? For all sorts of reasons.
So you don't need CRISPR to become an Avenger. We already can.
True. So I really want to be like Pantone color of the year type of thing, just switching colors and shit. I want to be black as well.
Well, there is that instant thing that's always struck me about Bruce Banner. So he got to be Hulk-like because of an accident at work, effectively. Right? But you never see at no point in his sort of beginning legend do you see him filling out an accident report form. And yet I have to do that even if I just cut myself slightly on a scalpel. So
Yeah,
it's just not realistic.
Yeah, totally ruining my immersions. Okay, so the next question is kind of basically for everybody, including the lawyer. Do you think that scientists carry the responsibility for their work and it's not for lawyers with little understanding of the matter to determine what is ethical?
I'm going to jump in and say it's for everyone, it's for society as a whole.
Yeah,
The
I
scientists
agree.
understand it, the lawyers may be more versed in the ethics, but it's a decision that people in this room have to make, everyone.
Especially given a lot of the people, well, if you're a taxpayer,
Yeah.
you will be funding the research, a lot of the research. So you have a say in it.
Yeah. Anybody want to chime in?
I mean,
Yeah.
there are a lot of physicists who have gone into philosophy and have done work on ethics too. So it is something that doesn't get away from anybody, I think, and definitely not from somebody who does important research. You always think about the implications of what you're doing.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Okay, so what you're saying is like a multi-field approach type of thing.
Yeah, but I think it's to a certain extent it's automatic. So.
Yeah, I think they kind of protected me. Somehow they spoke in my favor, but the one of the main points is understanding each other's work. Of course, lawyers and legal advisors and so on, they have to be involved in what the particular science do. So one cannot talk about CRISPR. One lawyer or legal advisor cannot talk about CRISPR without knowing how it works, or the work of each and every scientist. And the other point is that our job, I thought, is not to stop progress, it's to make it safer, right? So the ethics and law, they support science by making it safer, and somehow it sounds quite sticky, but somehow to protect the society from the risks. So we are not the bad guys. We
You're
are not
totally the bad guys, though.
Yeah, okay. Certainly.
Wait, can I add a point?
Go.
I don't know if you guys remember, but a while back when CERN was getting turned on, and
black hole.
there was this interview, and one of the interviewers asked the scientists, like, when we turn CERN on, is it going to create a black hole and
The
suck us
LHC.
all in? And he was like, oh, there's like a 0.0000001% chance or something like that, immaculately tiny. But the reporter was like, but there's a small chance that it's going to make a black hole and we're all going to die. And it was all over the news. It was like, when CERN goes on, we're all going to die. and I guess it might be unethical because the scientists are like, let's just turn it on. But
On the plus side, no one would ever have known.
yes, that's true.
I mean, that really was a science communications disaster. It started originally with an interview on something else where somebody said, we want to open a portal to another world, and speaking very figuratively, and he got all of this started, and I mean, most of these speculations were like completely absurd, because what happens in the LHC collisions is nothing else than what happens with extraterrestrial radiation all the time in the upper atmosphere. It happens with larger nuclei on the surface of the moon, and the moon is still there after quite some while that it's been around. So
Unless it's
it's
a
pretty
hologram.
obvious that this is not going to happen, not because somebody calculated it, but because it hasn't happened yet, and it would have happened a million times over if that danger actually existed. But that was not the argument that the CERN management used. CERN management decided to set up some risks committee, and just the fact that they got somebody to investigate it made people even more nervous.
So at some point in time, when we open a teleport to another world or we send CRISPR in space, you have to respect lawyers and legal experts, because we will have to protect not only the Earth but the whole universe.
You're basically Avengers.
Legal Avengers.
Yeah.
The legal Avengers.
Lego Avenger. But I just have one follow-up question. What the fuck would you be doing with CRISPR in space?
Well, I'll ask him.
Fair enough.
Well, for creating resistant
Colonize
organism.
Mars.
Yeah, why not?
Cool.
Yeah.
Back to the space lady. Okay, so where is the exact place where Euclid is going to be, and what's the reason it's going to be stable and with low radiation?
So Euclid is going to Lagrange point 2. And so the Lagrange points are like some points that I think there's like 5 of them around the Earth, and they're just very, very stable places in our solar system, because the
Because they're not
gravity.
interfered with by other planets?
Yeah,
orbiting?
yeah. So all the gravity kind of balances out, so it's super stable, and that's where it's going.
Cool. There's one question that we didn't manage to talk about much during the CRISPR discussion, but it's probably kind of basically there. How far away are we from immortality?
I get all the rubbish ones.
I'm listening.
Okay. So we do know some things about why we age in broad brush terms, but we don't know enough to then start messing with those things to sort of make people live longer. I mean, the bottom line is, if you want to live long, it's the old age story of everything in moderation, eat your greens, those sorts of things.
I mean, caloric restriction is the one thing that
Caloric
really works
restriction.
well, but you don't just diet, you pretty much starve yourself. And some of the caloric restriction guys working on sinusitis actually have tried it, a couple. No one's gone more than about a month because it's horrible. You know,
Yeah.
you live longer, but you don't want to.
You're hungry. You're hungry all the time.
Yeah, it's miserable.
Now there are C. elegans, the worm
Yeah.
I work on. There are mutations that have extended its lifespan significantly. They've doubled it,
Yeah.
at least doubled it. But that's probably something to do with the special cases of nematode lifespan and nematode, the niche that it occupies. It's doubtful that we can just move it into humans. So the answer is, you'll be waiting a long while.
And we'll all still be bald.
Yes. Yeah. Well, not
I
all.
want to live forever with hair.
Actually, if you go close to the vicinity of a supermassive black hole, the gravity time dilates you so slowly that you would watch like the entire universe pass you by before you even die.
Yeah, but for
Just you, though.
the time would be the same. I mean, you wouldn't be able to read one book more during that time.
No,
It's
it would
just-
be like watching a fast movie play
Yeah.
by, like the entire universe would pass you by.
Would you be able to see how you're being spaghettified into the black hole? I mean, for example, how you see from your knees onwards, how you
I think
basically
at that point
fall
you're
in.
dead.
Yeah, shit. There's nothing interesting happening in space. Okay, so back to profiling now. Does the fact that geoprofiling works in criminology mean that humans are awfully irrational under stress when committing crime? Anyone would try to cover their tracks better. Again, I think the serial murderer is asking the question.
Yeah, yeah. Really, the answer to it is the answer to the question of why it works in such different fields. It's just convenience. There tends to be a spatial relationship between the source of things and the things. You know, so Banksy puts artworks in places that he's near. I commit my murders. Oh, sorry. One would commit one's murders allegedly in places. There's a lawyer here as well. God, in places that are convenient for them. So that there is often you have a lot of disparate cases where there is a source of things, and the things tend to happen near that. So we're not stupid, but we're maybe just lazy. So.
Yeah, probably like an exquisite combination. So, next question is again a CRISPR question. How do you deal with off-target editing in CRISPR-modified cells when they go through several generations, and what are the most common unexpected results?
Okay, so the off-targeting effect, that arises because although we're targeting CRISPR with a small piece of RNA, we expect enzymes will make mistakes. So, off-target effects are somewhat controversial. Well, they're not controversial, they clearly exist, but it's clearly an area we don't fully understand because some researchers see a lot of off-target effects, other researchers see fewer off-target effects. In my own research, people have looked fairly carefully, because we can in worms, and we don't see that many off-target effects. On the other hand, we don't care that much, right? Because we don't care that, it's an experimental system. As long as we see what we expect to see, we're not too worried about if the worms are feeling a little bit. Whereas for a human, obviously that's not an acceptable outcome. And so the first researchers that looked at in human embryos did see off-target effects. We might be able to engineer enzymes to be more specific. Obviously, evolution is not necessarily looking for it's looking for specificity, but it probably accepts a kind of lower bound for specificity. We might be able to push that once we know more, and we do know quite a lot about the mechanism. So I suspect that there'll be an awful lot more. We need an awful lot more work on narrowing that down, but I think it's a technically doable problem. Okay, to make sure that we're in the bounds of acceptability in terms of off-target effects.
Okay. So again, we have like a more general question for most of you. What if a country uses all their citizens' data to target criminals? I'm guessing, for example, with models such as yours or something more, I guess, complicated. Where would you draw the red line on privacy issues?
Again, that's a question for society as a whole.
But where would you draw the? I mean, that's the question. It's not for society as a whole.
Okay. So this crops up in genetic stuff in
Yeah,
Iceland, which I know
it's
Jonathan
huge.
will be able to talk about.
Yeah.
There is stuff that is kind of by its nature public. You know, places I go around, I'm being seen by people, even if I'm also being seen by CCTV. That I have absolutely no issue with. You probably need some controls over who has access to the data, but that may be more of a legal ethics question. I think the crucial thing, so again, the Banksy thing, when we did all the TV stuff around that, we quite often got asked that question, you know, is this ethical? And in the first case, it's now become one of the go-to citations for big data. And it's clear that no one who cites it for that has ever read the paper, because there's about 100 data points. They weren't scraped off the web. My PhD student went round them with a GPS. It's the least big data study you've ever seen. But I did get asked if people should be targeting that. But the issue, I think, with any technology, whether it's geographic profiling, DNA testing, fingerprinting, is sure, it'll help you catch criminals. Policemen will usually help you catch criminals. The important thing isn't the technology, it's being careful about who you define as criminals.
Anybody of you want to chime in?
The big one is the era of personal genomics. So, I mean, in terms of ethics and law keeping track with CRISPR, that's a small fry compared to where we are now. Okay, so people have been getting their it's not genome sequence, but 23andMe and Ancestry allow you to upload you do a sample, and they'll do an analysis where they're looking at all the common variants that you have, and then that's effectively like a genetic profile. And you can then use that for ancestry purposes. So people use this to find other family members, right? So here's a consent issue, right? If you upload, now 23andMe and Ancestry, those are closed databases, okay? But there is a publicly available database called GED, I think it's GED, it's for hobbyists, hobby ancestry people, and there they upload what they call their variant sequence file, so basically the things that make them unique themselves. They upload that, and it allows them to trace ancestry. So there's something, I think, of the order of millions of individuals in that publicly available database. Lots of famous scientists have uploaded their genomes that way, right? If you upload your genome, you've exposed every single member of your family, right? Without their consent. By
And
definition.
some criminal cases, like the Golden State Killer recently in the State,
Golden State
are
Killer is a
solved
classic
because they have a
example of that.
match for a relative
Well,
of the killer.
they solved it by building a pedigree,
Yeah.
literally. And this wasn't close relatives, this was third and fourth cousins. Now, it's a relatively mathematically straightforward way. If you have somebody's genome sequence, and you have sequences for, certainly if you're of European descent, 3 or 4 million people, that's a gold mine. You can find virtually fourth, fifth, third cousins in that. You will find them, okay? So this is the big thing that challenges, and you are not going to be let to legislate this. This is out of the bag now. So it's about playing catch-up.
And medical testing as well. I mean, for those as old as me, when you used to test for a specific genetic sequence, you tested for that sequence precisely and nothing else. The developments have been so rapid that now you basically just sequence everything. You sequence the genome and then search for the sequence you're looking for.
Yeah.
But you get a ton of other information. You know, I could go in and get tested for astigmatism. I have a family history of astigmatism. They might discover I've got some fatal genetic disease. And they will in some cases. And then the question is, do I want to know about it? You know, so that issue is cropping up in hospitals all over the place.
The FBI database, which is hugely out of date now, but it only uses, I think, between 15 and 20 sites to do matches. Now, that's usually enough, okay? 23andMe and Ancestry, which is not sequencing, they look at more than 700,000 sites. You got that, and you've got somebody's match, you can, and you know enough, you can start making all sorts of connections. And in fact, I can't remember the guy's name, but a couple of years ago, or maybe even last year, showed that with some DNA sequence information and a relatively limited amount of other information, you can narrow down on somebody and find their address and find out all sorts of things about them, even though the data's been anonymized. Right, so this is something we do have to start thinking about as a society.
That's kind of cool.
I think in general, when you're talking about all these privacy issues, especially as far as crime fighting goes, I mean, we have to keep in mind that our great-great-grandparents, in their vast majority, lived in tiny little villages where everybody knew everything about everybody else. And that was the way that crime was limited. And the anonymity that we have in cities, and that we enjoy, that I enjoy, comes with more freedom to commit crimes without being observed. And now, just a couple of years ago, at a skeptics conference in Britain, I heard a talk by a policeman who said, "Well, we have to fight crime. We have to get people to interact more with their neighbors and to look at each other. So basically, you're taking away this privacy by getting in closer contact with your neighbors again." And at that point, I asked myself, "Wait a minute. If somebody's watching me, who do I want to watch me?
And who watches the guy that watches you?
Some policeman who doesn't know me, who has an order to look for maybe pickpockets or something, and as long as I'm not a pickpocket, I'm of no particular interest to him. Or do I want my nosy neighbor to watch over me?" I mean, in some cases, this mistrust towards the government it may be justified to a certain point, but there are other ways of creating security that sound at first sight much nicer, but are at least as restrictive.
I'm just going to chip in very quickly. That's exactly right. I grew up in quite a small town in Scotland, and my mother found out about my first girlfriend because we walked down the street from the park holding hands, and somebody halfway down the street was on the phone to someone 2 doors down who was on her way to the next door neighbour who was chatting to my mum over the fence. So before I got home, my mum knew about this. So
That's just a rookie mistake. Though.
it was, yeah.
Well, from legal application point of view, she said he has sometimes to choose between security and data protection.
Yeah.
So we cannot balance each. We have to choose. And if we are going against criminals, we might have to give the data protection as a victim, in order to be practed.
For a second, I thought you were going to say on the case of him holding hands with his first girlfriend. And I'm like, what are you going to say about that shit? Come on. Okay, guys, look, our time is running short already, and we're basically knee-deep in CRISPR questions. So let's do lightning round CRISPR questions. Like you have like 5 seconds each. You can say just a yes or no type of thing. And then if you guys have the time and focus and you're not drunk or anything this week, you can maybe answer some of those for our Facebook page.
Sure. Sure.
Jonathan, are you ready?
Okay. What if I get it wrong? Okay.
No. So, will it be possible that genetic modification help us adapt to conditions on a new planet? So far, so good.
In principle, yes. How you would go about making those changes? I mean, that's science fiction. There are several science fiction novels about that, right? Including a really bad science fiction film that's about to come out, I think.
Which one?
I can't remember. Something to do with Titan or something.
Titan.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
looked
really
like,
shit.
Yeah, that's the review that I read as well. Well, they didn't say really shit, but
Okay, next one. Does CRISPR affect all cells? How easy it is to get it everywhere in the body?
okay. So that's the real challenge. So if you want to, so it's easiest with cells that you can take out of the body and work in the lab. If you can't do that, then you have to have mechanisms of getting CRISPR in. And that's the challenge. So breathing in, possibly into the lung cells. We've got decades of doing, if you like, genetic and gene sort of targeting approaches, not terribly successfully, but and certainly in mice we can do that. So people have shown that you can get CRISPR working fairly successfully in mice livers, in intact mice.
Okay, what is your stance on human self-experimentation? I'm guessing
Human
with-
self-experimentation.
Yeah, with CRISPR, I guess.
Yeah, there is a guy who says he's improving himself by injecting.
Yeah.
He's just damaging the surface of his skin, effectively. he will not be. You're going to have to be fairly sophisticated to be doing self-experimentation.
Okay, isn't technology like CRISPR what we need to counter the effects of the relative lack of natural selection nowadays? So basically restart natural
Relative
selection.
lack of natural selection.
Yeah.
Okay, I actually use this as a final question for my students in my honours genetics class. Why would you think that evolution is slowing down? Okay, so selective pressure, arguably, if you live in an industrialized country, selective pressure has been lifted. But if you're looking at most of the people on the planet, they're still exposed to infectious diseases on a relatively large scale. Selection is going to be operating on that. Selection, we have evidence that selection is operating on the age of, on fertility, especially as people get older, they have children later. We see selection operating on fertility, even in industrialized countries.
Partner selection.
Hmm?
Partner
just
selection
yeah.
is a
There's partner selection. But even if we exclude selection, okay, the very definition of one of the major mechanisms that drives evolution is not selection at all, it's genetic drift. If you have small populations, so this is the random selection of different genetic variants. That will still be happening all the time.
The other thing that's happening, of course, is that in bigger populations, selection is relatively more important than drift.
Exactly.
And so we are making it easier for selection.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, I think Holmes' point, that the two most important drivers of selection in humans are pretty much disease and parasites, which are still there, and other humans and sexual selection. Nothing in that has changed.
Yeah.
Okay, so last one. What's the measures, I'm guessing, what are the measures that can be applied to prevent CRISPR from being used to kill a certain group of people with genetic differences? As though bald people.
Wow, another this is not serial killer, this is
But what have they
genocide.
got to live for?
What's with the bald people? Fuck you. Okay, let's say we want to kill all bald people with CRISPR. Can we do this?
In principle, yeah.
Fuck. Okay, that was it.